creepiest thing you've ever found that you weren't supposed to? I grew up in a quiet mountain town in the early 2000s, the kind of place where Friday night meant a bonfire in someone's field, and everyone left their doors unlocked because nothing ever happens here. Our house sat at the very end of a long gravel road, with nothing but pine forest behind it for miles. When I was 8, I discovered a little path that broke off from our backyard and wound deep into the trees. It wasn't an official trail, more like a deer path, but to me, it felt like a secret shortcut into another world. I'd follow it for hours, pretending I was an explorer finding new lands. One Saturday morning in late spring, I decided to see how far it went. The forest was quiet except for the distant sound of a creek, and the air smelled like wet moss from the rain the night before. About 15 minutes in, I came across something strange, an old wooden shed, almost completely swallowed by blackberry bushes. It didn't look like any shed I'd seen before. The wood was dark and warped, not from paint but from age and weather, and the roof sagged in the middle. The door had no knob, just a rusted metal latch. There was no path leading up to it. It was just there, in the middle of nowhere, like it had been forgotten for decades. My heart was pounding, partly from the excitement of finding something cool, and partly from that strange sense you get when you know you're somewhere you probably shouldn't be. I pushed my way through the brambles, getting scratched by thorns, until I reached the door. The latch was stiff but not locked. When I pulled it open, the smell hit me first, a mix of old wood, damp earth, and something else I couldn't place at the time. It wasn't quite rotten, but it was sharp, metallic. Inside, the shed was dark except for the light spilling in through the doorway. Dust hung in the air. Along one wall were shelves lined with glass jars, dozens of them. At first, I thought they were just old canning jars like my grandma used for pickles, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized they were filled with things. Some jars had what looked like preserved plants, roots, and herbs floating in cloudy liquid. Others had dark shapes I couldn't identify, some small enough to fit in my palm, others long and thin, curled up like snakes. In the center of the shed sat a wooden table. On it was a thick notebook, its cover stained and warped. I flipped it open and found page after page of messy, slanted handwriting. Most of it didn't make sense to me. Lists of Latin names, measurements, sketches of plants, and what looked like body parts. Some entries had dates from the 1970s. One page in particular made my stomach twist. It was a diagram of a human hand, not a cartoon drawing, but something that looked like it belonged in a medical textbook, with notes scribbled around it in red ink. I remember suddenly feeling very small and very unwelcome. It was that instinctive sense that you've crossed into someone else's private space, and they wouldn't want you there. I closed the book, backed out of the shed, and practically ran home. I told my parents I'd found an old shack in the woods, but I left out the part about the jars and the notebook. I didn't want them to tell me I couldn't go back. Over the next year, I visited that shed maybe half a dozen times. Every time it was the same. Jars on the shelves, the notebook on the table, the smell that seemed to stick to my clothes after I left. But one day in late autumn, something was different. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was that the notebook was gone. In its place on the table was a single glass jar, smaller than the others, filled with clear liquid. Floating inside was something pale, about the size of a golf ball. It looked like an eyeball. The moment I realized what it was, I slammed the door and ran home. That night, I had nightmares about being watched through the trees. I didn't go back for months. Then one summer afternoon when I was about 10, my friend Ryan and I were playing in the woods, and I decided to show him the shed. I figured maybe if someone else saw it, it wouldn't feel as creepy. But when we got there, it was empty. Completely empty. No jars, no table, no notebook. Just dust on the floor and a faint outline where the table used to be. The weirdest part? There were fresh footprints in the dust. Large, boot-shaped prints, leading from the door to the back wall, and then stopping, like the person had just vanished. Ryan thought it was hilarious and started making up ghost stories, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been there knew someone had found their stuff and decided to move it. Years went by. I forgot about the shed for the most part, moved away for college, and only thought about it when swapping creepy childhood story sessions with friends. Then, when I was 24, I came back to visit my parents. My dad and I were at the local hardware store when he ran into an older guy named Ed, who had been the county's sheriff back in the day. They started talking about old times, and out of nowhere, Ed said, "Hey, you remember that herbalist fella who used to live up on Ridge Road? The one we almost had to run out of town?" My ears perked up. My dad said, "Yeah, the one with that creepy shed full of jars?" Ed nodded. "Yeah, we got a few calls about weird smells, folks saying he was keeping animal parts and stuff. Never could prove he was doing anything illegal. Probably just taxidermy and home remedies. But after some kids found it, he packed up one night and disappeared." I asked when this happened. Ed thought for a second and said, "Oh, about 2003, 2004. Why?" That was exactly the year the shed had been emptied. Hearing that didn't make me feel better. It made it worse. Because if that guy had left because kids found it, then he knew I'd been there. And maybe he'd known all along. To this day, I sometimes dream about that shed. Except in the dream, when I open the door, the table is still there, and the notebook is open to a page with my name written at the top.
I began treating my husband more like a friend after being turned down for years, and now he's not talking to me. I, 44 female, have been married to my husband, 39 male, for just over 20 years. We get along very well, and we both care for each other very much. I can honestly say he is my best and closest buddy, and I know we can both trust each other with anything. We have so much shared history together, and we have each been there for each other through tough times and good times. Right now, we are financially stable, and we both work full-time. He works from home, and I drive about 40 minutes each way. We also have 2 kids, 20 female and 18 male, who are in college but still live at home, and we are paying their tuition. For the first 5 years or so, we were both very close and had a lot of physical intimacy. Even with small kids, our personal lives were healthy. After a while, I guess things got busier for us both. We still had physical intimacy regularly, but it was less spontaneous and mostly on the weekends. It stayed like that for years. But around 3 or 4 years ago, things slowed down a lot. It got to where he was only interested if he was in his fertile period. Then after a while, it got to be less and less frequent to the point where it was, like, only 5 to 7 times per year. For me, the lack of physical intimacy was very tough. When I would talk about it with him, he would say that he still finds me good looking and that I'm not doing anything to turn him off. He let me know that he isn't upset by my approaches and typically feels complimented when I show interest. That said, I was still being turned down about 19 out of 20 times. I got to a point where I was just unable to balance the intimate rejections and lack of physical closeness against the rest of our otherwise wonderful relationship. Then one day, something just snapped inside me, and I decided I couldn't live with this kind of stress anymore. So in a kind of last-ditch attempt to save my peace of mind, I decided to try something different. I started to train myself to think of him the same way I think of my friends and coworkers. Anytime I found myself thinking of him intimately, I would tell myself, no. That thought is not okay. And then I would quickly do something else to take my mind off it. At first, it was tough. After a few months, I trained my brain to think of my husband as more of a friend and not to entertain intimate thoughts of him at all. During this time, about 5 months, he seemed completely unaware of it. Recently, however, he tried to come on to me, and I turned him down. I wasn't mean or anything, but I honestly just wasn't in the mood, probably for the first time in decades, lol. He wasn't happy, but he seemed okay about it. The next day was a Saturday, and he was clearly feeling romantic, but I still wasn't feeling up for it. Not that I couldn't have, but it somehow just felt like a step down from my self-respect and self-worth. Like, I would suddenly be no better than a dog waiting for leftovers or a child begging for another helping of food. It just didn't feel right. I never said any of that. I just politely declined and said I had some other things I was planning to do, which was actually true. That night, I found him crying in our bedroom, and he said to comment friend zone so he can tag you in the next part.